Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I'm currently engaged to a wonderful man who's been dealing with quite a situation with his ex-wife regarding their two kids' custody arrangement. A bit of backstory: my fiancé and his ex divorced about 5 years ago. Initially, the split was relatively amicable. They agreed on custody arrangements without involving courts, mainly because my fiancé's work schedule was pretty demanding. He managed to get 5 out of 14 nights with the kids, and even that required him to get special permission from his boss to come in late one day every other week. Things were working fine until I came into the picture 3 years ago. The ex-wife didn't take it well when we moved in together, but she kept things civil on the surface. Then COVID hit, and that's when everything went sideways. When school switched to remote learning, the ex-wife contacted my fiancé and demanded he take the kids for 2 more nights, saying she couldn't manage her work and remote schooling. My fiancé told her he would need to check his schedule first, but she insisted it wasn't a request and that she couldn't handle it alone. Being the kind person he is, my fiancé agreed. On paper, it seemed great. We'd finally have 50-50 custody without court battles. But the devil was in the details. The schedule she proposed was a nightmare. We'd have the kids for 5 consecutive nights one week, then 2 separate nights the next week. Meanwhile, she got 5 straight nights every other week. We couldn't ever leave town for more than 3 nights without her permission, which she never gave. When we asked for just 1 weekend to attend my fiancé's cousin's wedding, she coldly reminded us that we had agreed to the schedule and that it was our problem, not hers. The kids weren't happy either. The single-night visits were especially rough on them. The younger one would complain about hating to pack for just 1 night, while the older one pointed out that they barely had time to settle in before having to leave again. After 6 months of this mess, my fiancé tried to reason with her. He explained that he wasn't getting quality time with the kids and mentioned their complaints about the single-night visits. He suggested moving the 2 separate days together, requiring only 1 day to be switched, and expressed flexibility about which day it would work best for her schedule. The ex-wife flatly refused to change anything. When my fiancé asked why, she said she didn't need to give him a reason. Even when he brought up how the kids hated the schedule, she remained stubborn. He reminded her that their agreement was designed to be flexible to avoid court involvement, but she just told him he could take her to court if he didn't like it. After letting things cool down for a few days, my fiancé called her again to understand her real concerns. She finally claimed it was because their son had physical therapy on the day we wanted them, and she wouldn't be able to see his progress or be involved. My fiancé assured her she could attend any sessions she wanted. She just needed to let him know. She finally agreed to the switch, but her true colors showed through pretty quickly. In the 2 years since then, she's only attended 2 therapy sessions. 2. But here's the best part. We documented everything. Every missed therapy session, every refused scheduled change, every time she prioritized her convenience over the kids' well-being. Last month, when she tried to modify the custody agreement again to suit her new work schedule, we pulled out all that documentation. Suddenly, she became much more flexible about our schedule requests. Amazing how that works, isn't it? Now we finally have a schedule that actually works for everyone, especially the kids. They're happier, more settled, and we even got to attend 3 family weddings this year, all without having to beg for permission. I recently moved to a small town after getting a new job as a service technician. The work schedule is Tuesday through Saturday, 8 to 5, though I often work late. My job involves driving around in a company truck to fix things at customers' houses, sometimes dealing with up to 10 different people a day. By the time I get home, all I want is peace and quiet while I unwind at my computer. When I was looking for a place to live, I found this decent duplex on the outskirts of town. During the viewing, the landlady made some concerning comments about how she'd shown the place to certain people she didn't want as tenants. I chose to ignore the obvious implications since I just wanted a place to live. The duplex seemed perfect at first until I realized my neighbor was running an unlicensed daycare next door. She had anywhere from 10 to 12 kids crammed into her tiny 1,000 square foot unit. When I signed the lease, she had mentioned running a small daycare, but I never imagined it would be this chaotic. My Mondays off became a nightmare. I'd wake up at 7 a.m. to kids banging on walls, jumping on furniture, and my neighbor screaming at the top of her lungs. This would continue nonstop until 7 p.m. After a few weeks, I decided to have a friendly chat with her about it. I started by politely asking if I had ever been too noisy, saying I'd be happy to quiet down if needed. She assured me that she never heard anything from my side. When I brought up the noise levels during the day, she immediately got defensive. She claimed that daycares were naturally noisy, and since it was her only source of income, she had no choice in the matter. I tried reasoning with her, asking if she could at least keep the kids from banging on the walls. She responded with excuses, saying she was just one person watching 10 kids and couldn't be everywhere at once. When I suggested she consider hiring help or taking some childcare classes, she became hostile. She told me I should be the one to move somewhere else, and that I was stupid for moving in next to a daycare in the first place. That's when I decided to ask if she even had a license to run her daycare. This question clearly struck a nerve. Things went south quickly after that. Turns out she was best friends with the landlady. At the start of the next month, the landlady served me an eviction notice, claiming I was causing tensions with other tenants. Even though I'd only ever spoken to my neighbor, they picked the wrong person to mess with. I did some research and discovered my neighbor was breaking multiple childcare laws. The state has strict limits on how many children an unlicensed facility can watch, plus requirements for inspections and background checks. She had none of these. I also learned that it's illegal for landlords, even private owners, to discriminate against tenants based on race or other protected characteristics. I called Child Protective Services to report the illegal daycare. Within an hour, 2 agents and some police officers showed up. They made her call all the parents to pick up their kids immediately. Through my thin walls, I could hear them explaining to each parent how they could be liable for leaving their children with an unlicensed provider. My neighbor got hit with a hefty fine and a court summons. But I wasn't done. After moving to a new place nearby, I invited 3 coworkers over, 2 black and 1 white, and explained my plan to expose the landlady's discrimination. When my first coworker called about the vacant unit, the landlady claimed she had already found another tenant. 2 days later, when my second coworker called, she gave the same excuse about the unit being rented. But when my white coworker called at the end of the week, her tune changed completely. She told him the unit was still available, though she made sure to mention she'd had some unsavory characters interested in it. I reported everything to the state's Commission on Human Relations and the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. The landlady got slapped with a fine and is now facing a lawsuit for tens of thousands of dollars. My new place has quiet neighbors and a landlord who minds their own business. Sometimes karma needs a little push in the right direction. My neighbor's illegal daycare is permanently shut down, she's drowning in legal troubles, and the racist landlady is facing serious repercussions. I'd say that's a pretty satisfying ending to the whole mess. After my shoulder injury ended my competitive swimming career 2 years ago, I had avoided pools like the plague. But my physical therapist had been insistent. Swimming would help rebuild my strength without putting too much strain on the joint. So here I was 3 times a week trying to remember how to move through water without looking like a drowning duck. It was during my second week that I met them, a mom and her son probably around 7 years old. The mom had noticed me struggling to find space in the crowded family area and kindly offered me her lane in the lap section, mentioning that I seemed to need it more than she did. After that, we developed this nice routine where I'd pause at their end of the pool to catch my breath and we'd chat a bit. Today started pretty much the same way. I was doing my usual attempt at freestyle when the mom waved me over. She asked if I could watch her son while she used the bathroom. I just nodded. Years of having 3 sisters taught me never to ask a woman about bathroom emergencies. The little guy was already comfortable with me, and we've been sharing the pool area for weeks now. For the next 10 minutes, our swimming lesson quickly turned into what felt like a circus act. He discovered that my shoulders made an excellent diving platform, and honestly, I didn't mind. The joy on his face every time he jumped from the clouds, his words, was worth the slight discomfort. That's when she appeared, a woman who practically materialized beside us, dragging a little girl behind her like a reluctant shadow. Her hair was styled in that infamous asymmetrical cut that seemed to be the uniform of entitled parents everywhere. She demanded to know where the boy's mother was and why I was letting him climb all over me. Before I could even open my mouth to explain, the little boy, still perched on my shoulders, delivered what might be the most legendary response I've ever witnessed. He loudly announced to Karen that his mommy had asked me to watch him, adding that his mom hadn't pooped in 3 days and had probably just got unstuck. Then he asked Karen if she was really going to ruin that for his mom too. The pool area went so quiet you could hear water dripping from the gutters. Then came the poorly concealed snorts and chuckles from other swimmers. One older gentleman actually had to pretend he was coughing to hide his laughter. Karen's face went through an impressive color spectrum, settling on a level of red that would make a tomato jealous. She grabbed her daughter's arm and stormed toward the locker room, muttering something about inappropriate behavior and calling the manager. The moment she was gone, I couldn't help but give the kid a high five. The other swimmers were openly grinning now, and one lady nearby actually gave him a thumbs up. When his mom returned, the embarrassment on her face was priceless. When her son proudly recounted the entire exchange, she was mortified about her personal business being announced to the entire pool, but there was a hint of pride in her eyes too. She apologetically suggested they should probably leave. Before they left, though, another regular swimmer approached us and told us not to worry about what Karen had said. The swimmer explained that Karen had been trying to get people banned from the pool for months, and just last week she had complained about an elderly couple doing water aerobics too suggestively. That made everyone laugh again, and the mom seemed to relax a bit. When they were leaving, I overheard the little boy asking his mom if they could come back tomorrow, and I couldn't help but smile. I grew up in what I can only describe as a nightmare. My parents weren't just neglectful, they were actively harmful to my development. They'd spend money on expensive vacations and luxury cars while I wore the same worn-out clothes to school. When I needed school supplies, they'd tell me to figure it out because they weren't made of money. Meanwhile, they'd come home with shopping bags full of clothes. They kept detailed records of every single penny they ever spent on me. Everything from diapers to school lunches was meticulously documented in what they called their investment portfolio. They'd regularly remind me that I was costing them a fortune and that I'd better be worth it someday. I started working when I was 15, lying about my age at a local diner. Every penny I earned went into a secret bank account. My parents found out about my job and demanded 70% of my earnings for room and board. When I refused, they kicked me out. I was 17. My supervisor at the diner noticed I wasn't doing well and asked if I had been sleeping in my car. I tried to brush it off, saying I was fine and could handle it, but she wouldn't take no for an answer. She told me her sister had a spare room and insisted I stay there until I graduated high school. That conversation changed my life. My supervisor's sister became the maternal figure I never had. She helped me apply for scholarships and student loans. I worked 3 jobs through college, studied whenever I could, and graduated with a degree in computer science. 10 years later, I was running my own successful tech company. I'd managed to stay completely off social media to avoid any contact with my parents. But money has a way of making noise. After my company was featured in a business magazine, they showed up at my office unannounced. My mother put on a sweet voice, calling me her darling son and claiming they'd missed me so much. I immediately called security to escort them out. My father got angry, demanding to know if this was any way to treat my parents, insisting they had invested everything in me. When I pointed out that they had kicked me out at 17, my mother tried to justify it by saying they were teaching me responsibility and that Their method had clearly worked, so I owed them my success. I told them I didn't owe them anything and asked them to leave. 2 days later, I received a lawsuit claiming I owed them $357,000 in childhood expenses plus interest. They argued that their tough love approach was directly responsible for my success, and therefore they deserved compensation. The lawsuit was ridiculous, but what came next was surreal. They went to every news outlet that would listen. They cried on morning shows about their ungrateful son, who abandoned them after they sacrificed everything. They started a social media campaign with the Knocker Justice for Parents that initially gained traction. But they got greedy. They started doing more interviews, and their story kept changing. In one interview, they claimed they paid for my college education. In another, they said they supported me through my first failed business. I never had one. Then my old supervisor from the diner came forward. She publicly shared how she had watched me sleeping in my car for 2 weeks before she found out about my situation and said that my parents were lying about everything. More people started speaking up. My high school teachers shared stories about how they'd pull money to buy me lunch. Former neighbors talked about hearing their screaming matches, about spending money on the waste of space, their name for me. The final nail in the coffin, they'd forgotten about their precious investment portfolio. My lawyer subpoenaed it, and it was a gold mine of evidence, not for them, but for me. It showed years of systematic financial abuse, including them taking money from my childhood bank account that relatives had set up for me. The judge didn't just throw out their lawsuit, she referred the case to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges related to the documented theft from my childhood account. Outside the courthouse, my mother screamed that I was destroying their lives. I calmly told her that their own greed did that. My father threatened to tell everyone what an ungrateful son I was. I simply replied that their own records had already told everyone the truth. They were eventually charged with financial fraud and had to pay restitution for the money they stole from my childhood account. The social media campaign they started turned into parental abuse survivors, where thousands shared stories of entitled parents trying to cash in on their children's success. My company launched a foundation that helps young people who've been financially abused by their parents, providing scholarships and legal aid. The last I heard, my parents were complaining on some obscure blog about how their son stole their retirement. Meanwhile, I'm finally living my life on my own terms, surrounded by people who actually care about me, not my bank account. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.